Kirsten, A Streetcar Named Desire. What's it about? It always seems a very destructive play in which everyone comes off very badly.
Yes.
What's it really about, do you think?
I mean, I think it's a play in which everyone on some level destroys everyone else. And that can be in many ways. It's not an outright destruction in some relationships, but whatever relationship you look at, it's somebody destroying somebody else. And it's the mechanisms of that, and it's how the past creates those forces that then sort of almost spin out of control to destroy people.
Right through to the end, where Stanley's wife, Stella, Stella refuses to believe that her husband has raped Blanche.
Yes.
And so she's committed. So Stella, in the end, turns out to destroy her sister.
Absolutely, yes. And it's a well-meaning destruction in a way. It's and
Because she wants to preserve her marriage and
and the best for her sister and all of that. But right from the beginning, we've almost seen this coming, I think, because Blanche can't sustain the role that she has sort of been asked to play in life. So the play is not just about destroying each other in relationships, but really about how our acceptance of a role that we sort of blindly play can actually destroy us as people. And you see that with Blanche. And in fact, the way in which it's about acting works on many levels. So you've got Blanche retreating, just visually, if you think about the theater, it's a house. It's the inside of a house with many floors. And right in the middle is this bathroom. And she retreats into the bathroom. It's her dressing room. It's her place that she prepares for her role. And so then she emerges when she decides she's ready to play the part. But it takes such a toll on her, and you see this in the play, that she needs to go in there and kind of regroup and get ready for her next scene. And so there's almost a diva quality to this character that she, against her will perhaps, or unbeknownst to her, she has taken on.
And she's a bit of a monster too, isn't she, in a way? I think you say that Tennessee Williams is full of women who are monsters.
Yeah, to a certain degree. Again, there's a spectrum. So you often see Amanda in The Glass Menagerie as this monster mother who's doing terrible things to her child through expecting her to conform to the Southern belle stereotype, and driving her son out of the house. So she's such a monster in that respect. On the other hand, you don't completely... It's a bit like Iago. If you completely hate the character, then the author has failed. There is something appealing, nonetheless, to that character, and the audience does relate to the character.
And what about Blanche in that respect?
So then Blanche, do you think maybe she might be a little bit of both? You feel this way in which she's been thrust into this, and because of the narrow expectations of, in the particular, the South at this time, there weren't really opportunities for her. And the big out would have been her getting married. That would have been her opportunity. She gets married, finds that her husband is homosexual, and she crushes her husband simply by the force of passing on those expectations of masculinity and virility that society has passed on to her. So
it's a very shocking scene. That I remember when I first saw it, when she's talking to this man who's courting her, Mitch, and she tells the story of this marriage and of how she goes into the room and finds her husband in bed with a man, and then I think taunts him, and he goes off and shoots himself. And it's got that extraordinary lines about how the searchlight was turned off. She talked about a searchlight coming on when she fell in love, and from that moment on there'd been no light greater in her life than this kitchen candle. Yes,
and it's incredibly poetic. And he was very interested in these kinds of images. There's a way in which Williams does symbolist drama 40 years after symbolist drama had died in Europe, and he sort of recreates it in his own way. And there's a play he wrote called The Night of the Iguana that actually has this same kind of arc of characters. So you have, he kind of experiments with having a character with whom one very much sympathizes, who is androgynous. She's a woman, but she is very self-consciously not sexual. And it's partly because she's had an encounter that then comes out, just like Blanche tells that story. It's absolutely analogous. So she tells the story of her failed, encounter with a man on a boat in a river, and that this was determining of her entire subsequent kinds of relationships that she had.
Do we believe Blanche totally, or is that bit of her being an actress, is she always dramatising herself to an extent, even in this rather moving scene, do you think?
I think that's a great question. It would maybe be a little cynical to think that even when she strips off the mask, if you will, that we can't fully trust what she's saying. I guess I'm not sure if Williams allows for that enough. If you think of A Doll's House, we are very clear who the real Nora is when she says, "I'm taking off my masquerade costume." You see her as she now stands revealed, as she is enlightened. Does Blanche ever reveal herself in that way, or does Williams reveal her to us? I'm not completely sure. It depends on the actress. And in fact, I saw Trevor Nunn's production with Glenn Close as Blanche, and people criticized sometimes the way in which Glenn Close didn't sort of fit the Vivien Leigh model of delicacy, very fragile.
She's done the film with Marlon Brando.
Yes, and of course Glenn Close is famous for Fatal Attraction, taking a knife to the men, and being so physically robust and very commanding, and so there was a sort of critical strain in the reaction of, well, she's not quite right for this part, and Stanley was physically smaller than her, but I think it was actually fascinating. I think it was really interesting because that shows how the text can actually bear those vastly different kinds of interpretations.
Yes, because one interpretation, obviously there is this clash between the two worlds, Stanley's and Blanche's. But
yes.
I think there have been critics who say that Blanche, in a way, she sort of symbolizes the old southern plantation world, whereas Stanley is more from the kind of very virile. So it's almost like a sort of woman's world of the past against this modern man's world, very virile world of Stanley.
Absolutely, and the extent to which, if you think of Glenn Close as very tough and sort of masculine, if people were, saying, actually it's not about physically how Blanche is, it's all about her mental state. And so you can see how that is completely, that's the through line, if you will, of the play, is what interests Williams is, how does this mental state play out in these very different, with these pressures on it. And her sister is one kind of pressure, and Stanley is another kind of pressure, Mitch is another. So she retreats into that bathroom because of all these different forces acting on her and pressuring her. And there's no other place that, there's no actual, I think in terms of space, there's no actual space for her apart from that one realm that is her dominion.
Do you think it's a pessimistic play? I mean, where does Williams leave us? I mean, I think he's quite gloomy, isn't he? This whole thing about people being destructive.
I think so. I mean, it's a bit like the end of Glass Menagerie, where you're left with just that, as you're conjuring a sort of image that really dominates the play. But in another play, I think you can't get away from the fact that these are staged. These are meant to be performed. And in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, in the stage directions, he emphasizes how much he wants the things of the room, so the bed and the drinks cabinet, all the sort of objects, the furnishings, to be larger than life and to be obviously not realistic in their dimensions. The bed is massive. And it's partly to convey symbolically the dominance of the bed in their relationship, because they can't conceive, because Brick is homosexual and he won't sleep with Maggie, and it's there in their face all the time, this bed dominating everything. But to think, get away from, I think often we see Williams as a realistic playwright, but actually he's after something very different. The poetic dimension, but also the symbolic dimension, and also the playing around with Brechtian devices that he does in...
What do you mean by that?
Well, so Brecht's ideas of interrupting the idea of an illusion when you go to the theater. So people could slip too easily into thinking, not really thinking about why people are doing things, but thinking what is going to happen next. Thinking of the suspense of the drama, because they get sucked into the reality on stage. And if you strip off the kind of mechanisms that create a play and you show the makings, the scaffolding, the lighting, and don't have people kind of slipping into roles that seem to be utterly realistic. If you're always foregrounding the illusion of theater, then you keep people alert to what's happening and away from getting, I guess the antithesis of catharsis. So trying, resisting the Aristotelian model of purging, pity and terror, and, you emerge from the theater kind of leaving that behind. Instead, for a lot of modern playwrights, it's all about confronting those things and thinking about them and actually making you think about what it is that's causing people to behave in certain ways.
So they're much more self-conscious.
Yes, and so in The Glass Menagerie, what Hollywood stripped out of it when they did the movie was the stage directions that show At certain points in the scenes, you will have a slogan descend on the stage, and it'll tell you what will happen in the scene. And you also have this device of the narrator, so you have a sort of play within a play that he's putting on. So you have meta-theater, so, showing a play within a play, and, essentially breaking the fourth wall between you and the audience. And so the audience can never forget that it's sitting in a theater.
And watching a play.
Yes.